Hey there. Welcome to First Look. Thank you for being here today. We are post-vacation Bible school, so we're just kind of still a little bit in recovery mode, but it was a wonderful week and looking forward now to the rest of the summer. And speaking of the rest of the summer, what you're going to be seeing here this coming Sunday is that I'm going to be on continuing education in Chautauqua, and so filling my spot in the pulpit will be Reverend Janet Edwards, who is a longtime member of Pittsburgh Presbytery and has been working for social justice and equity in this presbytery and beyond for a very long time, and we are very honored to have her be in the pulpit for us this week. And the passage that she chose is the story of the Syrophoenician woman. And so that's Mark 7:24 through 30. And there's also a version in Matthew. She might use pieces of both. But not knowing exactly where she's going to go with that passage, I at least thought that I would kind of give a few general thoughts about where I have seen that text in the past, and just some things for you to kind of have, be thinking about as we move forward. So I won't read it for you, but you can pause this and read Mark 7:24 through 30. So I'm going to give you my paused face, and then you can go ahead and do that right now. 3, 2, 1, pause. Okay, you read the passage. So the first thing that to know, I think, is that Mark is usually considered the first, chronologically, is the first gospel that was written, the earliest one. So that says to me that this story is a pretty vital, well-established story that was, I think, a crucial aspect of how we understand the Jesus movement. Jesus at that point in Mark 7, about just a chapter before he goes into this foreign territory of Tyre, he was driven out of Nazareth. He had healed someone who was foreign born, and he had kind of had some conversations about right practice when it comes to his disciples and Pharisees. And so he was kind of at a place in his ministry, especially right after the death of John the Baptist, where he was establishing for himself what his mode of operation was going to be. And so we get to this story in chapter 7. And the audience is not just the woman who he's speaking to, and not just us, but it's also the disciples. Because they would have been in foreign territory, and going into Tyre and trying to figure out what exactly is appropriate, what they should do, how do they interact with these people who are not Jews, would have been safe to say would have been uncomfortable on one side and would have seemed overwhelming on another. And so a lot of this, from my perspective, a lot of this, the way that Jesus speaks to this woman is really about them, right? He would have just fed the 5,000. He would have just been driven out of his own town. He would have really understood the feeling of otherness. He would have understood the call for compassion that would have been on him and his disciples. And so this story, we shouldn't forget those elements if we're looking at this story. So he addresses this woman and says, why, when I could be feeding the children, would I feed the dogs? Right? Now that's a harsh way of saying that, but again, I think he's not really addressing her. I personally think he's addressing the disciples, kind of reading their their read on things. You think this of these people. I'm going to show you a different way. And I'm going to do it through this woman who is strong and capable and thoughtful and assertive and more than worthy of our time and your time. Because if you think about the analogy he makes, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Because he says, well, why would I give to you when that was taking from children? I wouldn't give to dogs what would take away from children. But of course, that doesn't actually apply to Jesus. Jesus' power and authority and capacity for healing wasn't a limited resource. Well, if I heal you, then I can't heal these people. Well, that wasn't true. So it's really not about whether it's something that he has the capacity to do. It's really about understanding that the people that he's there to be around and to serve are worthy of the disciples going and doing. And that everything that they knew, that all those elements of what faith is and who you serve and who you associate with, that all that was changing. And this is what Jesus needed them to know was true. And so a big part of the story is about the disciples learning and thus us learning. What does it mean to be inclusive? What does it mean to care for others? What does it mean to change the narrative? What does it mean to see the world through a different lens? That's a huge piece of the story. But the other part of this story that I think is also a crucial piece that we need to be paying attention to is how this woman is undeterred, right? She is meeting a man who is not of her people. She's advocating for her daughter. She's bypassing the fact that he says something very harsh to her. And she continues to pursue and play through what he's saying because she knows that he can do it, and she's willing to do whatever she needs to in order to help her daughter. And so from our perspective, she becomes this the one that we would want to copy, right? We want to be like this person. So how do we advocate for ourselves? How do we advocate for others? How do we do that with courage? How do we do that with vigilance? I mean, that's what you see in this woman, right? This woman is the example of how we do that. So you have both of those things played out, because of course Jesus says to this woman, your faith is why I'm doing this. So there's a couple of different types of lessons that we see there that are really important. And one, who we advocate for, why we do, what Jesus' mission was about, and thus what our mission needs to be about, how we see other people, how we see opportunities for growth and for change and for our worlds to be expanded, that those can't be limited to the places that we're comfortable going, the people that we're comfortable with. It's all of that wrapped up into one story. And then getting to how bold and courageous this woman is. All of that is in this story. And when you think about how to apply that, I think it kind of speaks for itself. You know the people, you know the groups, you know the segments of society that have been the most segregated, the most discounted. And just through conversation, through experience, through listening, that there is still a lot for us to do as the church and as individual people to continue to create a more welcoming, inclusive, caring world for everyone imaginable. And we don't, because it makes us feel uncomfortable, like the disciples. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. We don't know where to start. And what I think this story reminds us is that you just have to start. You just have to go. You just have to ask. You just have to read. You just have to learn. You just have to listen. And then in addition to that, how many spots are we in where we don't know, where we feel timid, or we feel like we don't deserve it, or we feel like we shouldn't ask? This woman basically doesn't take no for an answer. And that kind of advocacy is something for us to contemplate and to really try to live out on our own. And I think you see that very clearly in this story. And I like the fact that, like I said, that it's presented to us really from the get-go of Jesus' ministry. Once he's driven out of his own hometown for telling them that they may not be the people that they think that they are, and that the Messiah may not be for them. And then John the Baptist is killed, and now it's his work to lead. One of the first things he does when that happens is feed everyone, and then show his disciples that the world is bigger than they have made it out to be, or that they have been told that it is. That God is now on a new path, that the path is now taken another direction. And that's a huge, huge piece of it. And I think as much as we like to say, or like to think, that we have done a good job, either individually or as a nation or as a church, of including people, we find ways not to all the time. And that's regardless, whether it's ethnicity or sexuality or gender or whatever it happens to be. We do that over and over and over again. And you might think to yourself, well, how am I doing that? Well, you need to ask questions. I need to ask questions. And believe people when they say this is how they feel. And, I think we put up a lot of barriers, and we are guarded so much of the time around trying to, about not knowing what to do, or just assuming that we're doing okay or whatever. But we always have places to grow and places to move. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces of faith that we come up short in. And when we take a step, we assume that's the last step that we need to take, and it almost never is. And this woman in this story, I think, teaches me something and reminds me something about the power, I think, that faith can play in our lives. And I think for me, my faith and being in the church is often so focused on my own journey, focused on my own discipleship, or focused on my own path, that I need as many reminders as I can get my hands on as to what the church can accomplish, how it can get ahead of society, how it can get ahead of the world around us and do good in places where the world in general is not doing. And I think that's a big piece of things. And it's something for us to really take to heart and consider. So I'm just gonna leave it there, because again, I don't know where Reverend Edwards will want to go, but those are my kind of first takes on this text, and so I hope that that's helpful as you're moving through it. Okay. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for the time to go and do some continuing ed. If you need something, please let me know. As always, thank you for doing this with me, and I will see you next time for another First Look. So take care.